Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, we're going to dive into some geography today, but geography and history are often related because there's usually a historical reason behind how borders end up the way that they are and when things got discovered and things like that. So it's a unique lens through which to view history. And this was a channel that was recommended to me by a few friends. It's called Geography by Geoff. I just subscribed. He has 662,000 subscribers, and this video is called Let's Fix the United States Awful Borders. So it gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit about how the borders ended up the way that they did, and then see what he has to say about how to fix it and what the implications historically might be for that. So it'll be an interesting topic. I put the link down in the description so you can check it out without my commentary. I want to thank Brian in Finglas, Dublin, Ireland. I loved my time in Dublin. I cannot wait to get back. Brian, thank you so much for your support on Patreon. He signed up just a couple of weeks ago. Couldn't do it without you. Let's dive into this one.
The United States is a mess. As it grew from east to west, it acquired territories, carved them up, divided them even more, and eventually made them all into individual states. But this process made no sense, and many states were divided and created for stupid political reasons rather than anything natural.
Made no sense is probably a little harsh. I mean, it always made sense to somebody, or else it wouldn't have been done. Political reasons made a lot of sense at the times in which they were made. A lot of these borders being drawn for reasons that range from international diplomacy to state infighting to differing goals and desires and purposes for different groups. There's all sorts of reasons why things happen the way they do.
When all was said and done, we ended up with a country whose state borders look very fake. So I decided to fix them, mostly along natural borders, but also there's some other stuff too. And before you get too riled up, this is gonna be fun, probably.
I agree with them. Whenever you do something like this, somebody takes it seriously. Somebody takes it too seriously and they get all worked up. And you should never take this kind of stuff seriously. I did a whole video where I ranked all the states on a tier ranking. And some people took really strong offense to that, and you shouldn't. It's all done in jest. Of course I'm going to rate Michigan an F. No matter what reason you give me to not rate it an F, I'm from Ohio. And if I was from Michigan, I would rate Ohio as an F. That's just the way it goes. So this should all be taken in that spirit of lightheartedness. No more duplicates.
The first place I want to start as we fix borders are the states that are essentially just duplicates that were formed for reasons that never really made sense in the first place. The biggest culprit here is North and South Dakota. These two states were originally created out of a single territory called Dakota. But when the territory was about to be admitted as a full state, it was quickly divided into two states in order to give the Republican Party at the time a congressional advantage.
And this is the exact reason why you would have so much trouble today adding new states. You can do that kind of thing when you have a dominant political party like you had with the Republicans in the aftermath of the Civil War, where they dominated Congress and the White House. You couldn't do that right now in a very closely divided electorate. If you tried to add a new state, that's two new senators that are probably going to vote a particular way. You'd probably have to add two more on the other side to balance it out.
Basically, we have two Dakotas for political reasons and nothing more, so they're now back to just being called Dakota. Up next are the Carolinas. Now, these two date back before the United States was even a thing, so maybe there's an argument to keep them separate, but I'm not going to do that. These two colonies split because of a war with a local...
I gotta back up for a second, because there's going to be some people in those states that are really angry about the choice of colors here. You've got North Carolina blue rather than Duke blue, for example. And you've got the orange for Clemson rather than South Carolina colors. So some people on the other side of those rivalries aren't going to like that.
Keep them separate, but I'm not going to do that. These two colonies split because of a war with a local indigenous tribe. The Northerners at the time required more resources to acquire the land they wanted, and the Southerners didn't really want to help, so they split. Well, that doesn't seem like a good enough reason for divorce to me, so now they're back to being just Carolina. And finally, we have the two Virginias. But unlike with the other two, I'm going to keep these two separate. mostly because West Virginia broke away so as to stay with the Union during the American Civil War, and, well, I think that's a very good reason to become a separate state.
So he's pretty arbitrary, though. I mean, because if you think about it, Virginia rejoined the Union, so the reason for the separation is no longer valid. So I would think of any of these, this is as valid as any to reconnect those. And of course, one of the things that would be interesting to analyze in all of this is what this means politically. So you rejoin, like today, you rejoined the Dakotas. You just took away 2 Republican senators and maybe 1 Republican congressman. I'm not sure. It might still be 2. You merged the Carolinas, same deal. You're taking away some Republican senators from the equation, and suddenly the Democrats have the advantage. Now you merge West Virginia and Virginia, you probably give a slight edge back to the Republicans in Virginia in the Senate, so that might kind of balance it out.
Nice job, West Virginia. All right, with those states out of the way, let's get to fixing the rest of the borders. And we're going to start with the square states in the West.
What's wrong with the squares?
The United States has some wacky borders, mostly in the western half of the country. So we're going to
I don't know. Pretty wacky. To me, it seems less wacky in the West because they're more straight lines rather than following rivers and little quirky things. And you got some crazy stuff going on, for example, between Missouri and Iowa, Nebraska and Iowa, like by the airport in Omaha, because the rivers change course, like the Missouri River there and the Mississippi River down along Mississippi and Arkansas and Louisiana down here. The river changes course, and suddenly you end up with like Mississippi territory on the western side of the river and vice versa.
All of these states up and break them apart, largely along natural features. This means using the Continental Divide, mountain ranges, rivers, and deserts to make these new borders.
Yeah, see, I prefer the square borders, though. I don't know.
Mostly in that order. So let's get to it. Now, given its prominence, we're going to start by dividing the states up by the Rocky Mountains and the Continental Divide that runs through it. So, from north to south, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico all get split in half, with their former western sides joining the states of Idaho, Utah, and Arizona respectively.
Wow.
This already makes way more sense in my head. Let's keep heading west.
See, that to me looks ugly, though. I much prefer the square borders. I don't know. I'm beating a dead horse. I know.
Going in that direction and focus on Nevada. Nevada is mostly one big desert. In fact, I ranked it the state with the worst geography because of this. So why not double down and just give them the deserts of California and Oregon as well? Done. This leaves California a little top-heavy, but most of its population is in the south still, so it evens out. Maybe? And this just leaves Oregon and Washington. Honestly, both states are mostly fine except for one thing. Oregon is largely divided along the Columbia and Snake Rivers. But in the northeast of Oregon, instead of the border following the Snake River, it just cuts straight across. So we're just going to add that missing chunk back to Oregon and call it a day.
That's not bad.
As for the other western states, just a few minor changes. The Dakotas are, of course, just a single state now. Done. Nebraska and Kansas are mostly fine, except Kansas City is now in Kansas. Come on, guys, that one should be obvious. And then we're going to give Texas's hat to Oklahoma to get
Amarillo.
rid of that wonky little
Not
panhandle,
gonna like that.
and we'll make this divide along the Red River.
So when I was in the northern panhandle of Texas, at that point in my life, I had never been to Oklahoma before, so I wanted to at least go into Oklahoma. So I was way up in the north, and so I drove up to the border. And when you drive into Oklahoma, at the place where I was, the Welcome to Oklahoma sign was riddled with bullets. Like somebody on the Texas side had just been like doing target practice on the Oklahoma sign. But when you came back into Texas, there were no bullet holes in the Texas sign. It was kind of interesting, I thought.
Texas is way too big anyways, so it's time to slim up just a little bit. The West
That's
has
not a
been
bad choice.
fixed, mostly. Things are still a little awkward, but it looks a lot more natural now. So let's move on to the rest of the states.
I know he's going to fix the northern border of Ohio because it doesn't match up with the border of Indiana.
The eastern half of the United States is not in nearly as bad of shape, so our fixes over here will be relatively minor compared to the western, blockier half. But there's still some things I want to change. First, let's head to the deep south. This whole area is wrong. First, Louisiana is the only state that doesn't get divided up by the Mississippi River. But we can't have New Orleans and Baton Rouge in Mississippi, so we'll make a concession here. The eastern side of Louisiana up to Lake Pontchartrain will now be part of Mississippi, excluding Baton Rouge.
So, but what's the point? Either you do it or you don't, right? If it's already still going to divide certain parts, it defeats the whole purpose of changing any of it. I don't know.
Which is a little weird, but still worth it. Next, Florida has a really long panhandle, preventing it from being
you're going
a true
to Alabama.
peninsular state. So, let's just go ahead and give the western edge of Florida's panhandle to Alabama. It's not like Florida needs more coastline anyways. Also,
That's fair.
I have a sneaking suspicion that that part of Florida is more culturally Alabama anyways. Moving north from Florida, we actually have another continental divide. This is the divide that largely follows the Appalachian Range. And just like with
Kudos for pronouncing Appalachian correctly. Give them points for that.
Rockies, we're going to split up all of the states along this line. So that means that Georgia, Carolina, which was already merged together, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania are all split.
And I don't mind this so much because this largely takes them back to their original borders, because most of these colonies, when they were founded, their western border was considered to be the Appalachian Mountains.
The eastern side will remain their own states, but the western ends will join Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio.
Yes.
The latter two.
And honestly, let's be fair here, okay? This part of Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania, is not all that dissimilar from chunks of eastern Ohio. Maybe not like Cleveland area, that's different. But like where I live, we're very culturally similar. I'm literally 5 miles from Pennsylvania where I live.
Split along the Ohio River. Now, you might have noticed that the Appalachian Continental Divide goes north into New York. You're not wrong to think that this might necessitate a split, but I decided not to split it in half because the only logical state that would absorb that land would be Ohio.
I see no issue here. I don't know what the problem is. We'll take Buffalo. I don't mind taking Buffalo. I don't know if we get Syracuse out of that.
And I just couldn't bring myself to make Ohio even bigger. So New York stays as is. Now, before we head too far north, there's one other thing we gotta fix. The Delmarva Peninsula. Right now, it's split between Delaware,
Delaware's gonna
Maryland,
get gobbled up,
and Virginia, with Delaware really getting shafted here. So, it's now all Delaware.
See, I was just gonna give Delaware to Maryland.
As for the rest of the Northeast, it's fine. There's nothing too obvious here to fix. New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine get to keep their current borders. Congratulations on either not being awkward enough for me to fix your borders, or for being so small that if I changed anything, it would be a literal existential crisis. This just leaves us with the Midwest to straighten out.
Okay.
So let's start with Michigan. I'm sorry, but you can't have the Upper Peninsula anymore.
No, it wasn't theirs to begin with, but they got the Upper Peninsula from Wisconsin. Remember, so originally Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, a little bit of what is Minnesota today. That was the Northwest Territory. And it was created by the Northwest Ordinance in the late 1780s. And Ohio was the first of the states that was created out of that. And so as they were creating these states and they create Michigan, Michigan comes along much later, like a couple decades after Ohio. So yes, we will always be the older brother. They have the war that they fight over Toledo, and because Ohio gets Toledo, Michigan gets the Upper Peninsula as a consolation prize. I think Michigan got the better end of that deal.
To Wisconsin, and therefore should belong to them. But in exchange, you can have the Toledo Strip back from Ohio, which is what you wanted originally. I'm not really sure what that does for you today, but it is what it is. And that's basically it. The rest are mostly fine. In fact, Minnesota might have the...
But here's the problem with the Toledo Strip. The border's already crazy. This is where the Ohio border goes. We really should just straighten this out right there and make it even.
But it is what it is. And that's basically it. The rest are mostly fine. In fact, Minnesota might have the most perfect borders of any contiguous US state. It's mostly made up of the Minnesota,
Yeah.
St. Croix, and Mississippi rivers, aside from a few straight areas, and its southern
I don't
border.
know. I think if you're going to be consistent, you need to give the southern part to Iowa to be consistent.
But we'll just blame the southern border on Iowa. Indiana, Illinois, and Arkansas rounds out the last of the lower 48, and they're all passable, with nothing obvious to fix about them.
I'll be deep in the cold, cold ground before I recognize Missouri.
And, of course, there's Alaska and Hawaii. But
Nothing you can do
obviously,
there.
neither can have their borders changed because they don't border anyone else. Well, Alaska does border Canada, but we're not going international with this video. There's one final thing you might have noticed. I combined 4 states into 2 states, which means we only have 48 states. Now, maybe you're not a patriot, but I demand that the old Stars and Stripes have 50 full stars on them.
Okay.
So, we gotta add a couple states.
Cut up California.
This is actually pretty easy because, in case you were unaware, the United States owns territories that are not full states within the country. So we can cobble together some states from them, right? The most obvious full state to include would be
Yeah,
Puerto Rico.
makes sense.
It has more people than 19 other states, and as such, makes no sense to keep it as a territory in my eyes. So, welcome aboard Puerto Rico. And because they're nearby and also a territory, we're going to add the US Virgin Islands as part of Puerto Rico.
Makes sense.
Next up are the territories of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, these 2 territories are pretty small, but strategically they're very important.
Yeah.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to combine both into a single state called Mariana, because the whole island chain for both is called the Mariana Islands. It will be the smallest state by population by far, but when Nevada was admitted to the Union, there were fewer than 8,000 people living there. So I think we can manage. As for American Samoa, it kind of feels like it should be unified with Samoa, but that's really not for me to decide. So we'll leave them as a territory for now. And as for Washington, D.C., I'm just gonna leave it as is until the politicians figure it out. Basically, I'm not touching it. It can stay as a little half square for now. But there we have
It used to be a whole square because it was originally carved out of Maryland and Virginia, but then the Virginia part got given back, and just the Maryland part stayed as D.C.
Got our 2 stars back with Puerto Rico and Mariana, making for a full 50 states once again. We did it! So it's the morning of the day that this video gets published on November 4th, 2024. And I've been working on it now for about 18 hours straight. I am tired. This video is a little rougher than my usual episodes, and for that, I do apologize. But I scrambled to pull this episode together last minute because tomorrow is the big day here in the United States. And I wanted to make and publish this video because a lot of people have been talking about fixing the United States for a while now. But the reality is that we all have to play our part in fixing and improving this country.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
the only way we can play that part is by voting.
All right. I agree with him, but we'll let that for another day. That was cool. That was an interesting kind of thought exercise. Of course, the next natural step to that is to analyze what that would mean politically, as I mentioned at the beginning, thinking about how that would impact senators. For example, I think the territory that Ohio gobbled up wouldn't change Ohio's demographic, really. It would still be very red. But I think that would take enough of the red away from Pennsylvania to make what's left of Pennsylvania a very solidly blue state with 2 Democratic senators, which it has right now anyway. Or no, they just elected a Republican. So they have 1 and 1 right now. But I think it would make it very solidly Democratic. So you have to analyze all of that in there too. But that'll be for another time. I want to thank Adam in Columbia, South Carolina, and Troy in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I have friends there. So much for your support on Patreon. Could not do this without you. If you want to learn more about how to support the channel on Patreon, the link, along with a bunch of other links to my other channels, down in the description. Thanks for watching.